This at the beginning because I feel like I will forget at the end. But we're starting something new today that came out of our small group meeting a couple weeks ago. And that is the idea that after we kind of listen to a sermon on Sunday, whether it be from me or someone else, that it's good to have the opportunity maybe to think through it more and discuss it more. And so for the first time today, in several years, I have discussion questions geared for small groups to help you sort of discuss what you've heard. So if you're in a small group and you want to use these, we're trying this out. We're going to start it. We're going to test it for a little while. We're going to see how it goes. And we're looking for feedback, like, wow, those questions were really lame this week, or those questions got some good discussion started. So I've printed out a few, but where we'll put them so that you can access them, don't get them yet because you'll know what the sermon's about, but I'll put them here and you can get them after the service. Or you can go onto our website, and under the Connecting tab, there's now a discussion questions page. And you can go right on there. They are, because technology is so amazing, they are scheduled to post at 12:19 this afternoon. So after that point, you should be able to access them. And we'll see how it goes. We'll see if that is something that's useful, then I'll keep working on them, and I'll keep staying up till 12 at midnight on Saturday to get them done. Or maybe I'll learn to do them before that. Anyway, for the past few weeks, we have been talking about our mission as a church. We as a church make disciples of Jesus who do four things. We hope that they experience God in a daily relationship. We talked about that was Jesus' secret to success. He said if you want to have a fruitful life, you have to stay connected. Like we're just like branches, and we have to stay connected to the vine if we want to have a fruitful or successful life. And so Jesus said that this idea of walking with God in a daily relationship, staying connected to Him, that's really His secret to success. We also talked about how we want to help people learn to follow Jesus in sacrificial obedience. That when you follow Jesus, it's not all a walk in the park. There's actually this aspect of taking up your cross and following Him and dying to yourself. And last week we talked about the warm and fuzzy aspect of loving each other in authentic community, except we discovered that it wasn't so warm and fuzzy after all. It was actually difficult and messy and probably the hardest part of all. And today I want to talk about serving the world as faithful stewards. Okay? So serving the world as faithful stewards. And in the process, we are going to discover Jesus' secret to achieving greatness. Okay? So if we wanted to see his secret to having a fruitful life, to accomplishing much, to doing things that were significant, we stay connected. What is his secret to being great, to winning, to finding somehow this important place in life? Now, we have in our society today different concepts of greatness, and we have a caricature of our society's concept of greatness sitting in a house that is white, if you know what I mean. Is anybody following me here? That there is this leader of the free world guy who is an excellent example of all of the wrong things that our society upholds as what it means to be great. So Donald Trump is focused on making America great again. And along the way, it wouldn't hurt if he made himself great, right? He's all about winning. That's a word he uses a lot. He's all about it being big and huge with a Y, which is another word that he uses a lot. Have you ever wondered what Jesus would say to someone so intent on winning, on being the greatest, on being first in everything? So in a moment, we're going to look at a passage where Jesus addresses this idea of someone who wants to be great, who wants to be first, who wants to be huge. But first, because it wouldn't be fair for us all to read this passage and just be thinking about some guy sitting innocently in a White House down there, let's try to think about how it might apply to us. Is there anything inside of you that wants to be the greatest, that wants to win, that wants recognition, that wants praise, that wants to be important, that wants to be huge? Is there anything in you that wants to just let everyone have it? Let them know what you really think for once. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. But here's my thing. It's my theory that one of the reasons that Donald Trump gets on so many people's nerves is that he secretly reminds us of ourselves. I think, this is just a theory, I have no proof, I think we all have a little Donald Trump inside of us. Demanding to get our own way, wanting the attention, wanting to be big and important, wanting to win all the time. And of course, we all know that you should keep that part of yourself hidden. And we expend a lot of effort and energy shushing that little Donald Trump that lives inside of us. Shh, it's not the time to say that, right? So we know that. We know you don't say those kind of things, even if you think them, right? And so I think one of the reasons that he annoys and irritates us sometimes is because, not because we can't understand why he is the way he is, but we just know it's not polite to say those things out loud. And so I think what we need to do as we read this passage is make sure we don't make this about someone else, but that we make it about that part of us that wants to be great, that wants to be first, that wants to be important, that wants to be praised and recognized. And let's hear what Jesus would have to say, not to Donald Trump, but to us. What he would say to us in our own desires to have the attention and to get the spotlight and to be the best and first. So Mark 10, starting at verse 35, little story here. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, to Jesus. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Always be nervous if someone comes to you and says, I want you to do for me whatever I ask. It's kind of like, can you do me a favor? Well, that will depend on what that favor is, right? Like, how about you ask me what it is first before you want a yes or no answer? Anyway, so he says, well, what do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, it's simple. Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. And you know what? We're so humble, we don't even care who's who. Which is right and which is left. It's fine with us. As long as we're number 2 and number 3 after you. That's fine. He says, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? He's being sort of shady. He's kind of referring to the crucifixion he's about to go through that they don't really understand yet. And he's saying, yeah, you want to know the path to greatness? Well, I'm about to go to the cross. And they're like, sure, we can. Whatever cup you're going to drink, whatever baptism, I mean, it can't be that bad, right? Jesus shook his head. That's not in the text, but I'm sure that he did. And said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. Both of them were persecuted and suffered greatly later in life. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. It's called passing the buck. And even Jesus did it there. He's basically saying, it's not my choice. You're going to have to ask God if you want those places. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Now, apparently, James and John were British, because that's the only type of person who I can think being indignant. I am so indignant that they asked about that. Sorry, Rob and Liz, but I mean, it just... irritated, annoyed. We have some other non-church words that we could use right there. The 10 are not pleased about this. And I'm not sure why they're not pleased. I'm not sure if they're annoyed because, James and John have let their inner Donald Trump out. And they're like, yeah, well, we all wanted to be greatest too, but we didn't ask, right? That's rude, obviously. By the way, in another telling of this story in one of the other Gospels, I think it was Matthew, it's their mom who comes and asks on their behalf, which is perhaps even more embarrassing. Anyway, so the 10 are indignant. They're kind of ticked off. They're annoyed with James and John. They're irritated. And Jesus calls them all together, and he says this. He says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So here's Jesus' secret to greatness. If you want to be great, and if you want to be first, you have to become a servant. You have to become a slave. In the kingdom of God, the path upwards is actually the path downwards. That to desire to be great in Jesus' eyes is not to somehow gain authority over people or to become a ruler or have power or be the best or at the top. It's actually to become the slave of everyone. Now, notice that Jesus does not get annoyed. He might chuckle, he might shake his head, and I'm sure he did. But he didn't yell at them or scold them for wanting to be great. The desire for greatness, the desire not to live a mediocre life, I think is a God-given desire. And so if you are one of these people that longs for greatness, that longs to be first, that longs to know that you've lived a significant life, that you've done well, that's okay. But Jesus may adjust your vision of what greatness is. Because in his eyes, being great is not being most important, but it's becoming a servant. So, what does this mean? What does it mean to become the slave of everyone? I don't think that it means that we never do anything that we like ourselves. We never seek our own good. We never have any enjoyment. We never have any fun. I don't really think it's that extreme. If you remember some of the other things Jesus said, he's given to speaking in hyperbole. And so he's trying to make a dramatic point by saying a dramatic thing. So if we followed all of Jesus' teachings literally, we would have no hands because we would have chopped them off because they cause us to sin, and we'd have no eyes because we would have gouged them out because they cause us to sin. We would have to hate our father and mother and wife and children. And all. Jesus spoke in these extreme statements to drive a point home. And so becoming the slave of everyone does not mean becoming the doormat of the world. It doesn't mean neglecting yourself. It doesn't mean having this terrible slave-like life. But it is about humbling ourselves, and it is about making ourselves lower in order to meet the needs of those around us. It's about learning to ask the question all the time, what's in it for them? Not what's in it for me. How do I help them win? Not how do I help me win? How do I lift them up? How do I come alongside them and help them rather than how can they contribute to my life? Now, Jesus gave a very stunning visual of the kind of service he meant the night before his crucifixion, when right before the Last Supper that we're going to commemorate here with this bread and cup in a few minutes, he went around the table, knelt down, and washed the feet of each of his disciples, including Judas, who was about to betray him. Now, this idea of foot washing is foreign to us today because we all wear shoes and boots. But back in those days, they wore sandals and they walked everywhere. And so when they got somewhere, their feet would be dusty, muddy, bloody, just depending on what they walked through. And so the job of the very lowest slave in the household was to go around with a basin and wash and dry those feet of the guests as a way of just saying welcome and, thanks for traveling and let's clean your stinky feet up. And here Jesus, who is the master, clearly the most important one in the room, voluntarily washes his disciples' feet, making them feel extremely uncomfortable. Peter's like, no way, this is not going to happen. And Jesus is like, well, then you can't be any part of what I'm doing here. And Peter's like, okay, well then give me a bath. Jesus is like, no, your feet's good enough. But the point is that Jesus sets this example, and when he's done, he looks around at all of them who have been very awkward because he's washing their feet. Should I have done it? Was he waiting for one of us? And then he looks around and he says, listen, I'm the master here. I've washed your feet. Now go and do it for each other. I've set you an example that you can go and do it likewise. And so for us today, we're supposed to follow him not just in taking up our crosses and dying to self, but in taking a basin and taking a towel and washing each other's feet. Now, we do that as a denomination, our Anabaptist background. We do that once or twice a year, or we have done it once or twice a year, literally wash each other's feet. At least 4 people show up for that. It's no less awkward, although quite a bit less dirty than it was back in Jesus' day. It's an awkward and it's a strange thing. And I do think that it's a really valuable and awesome experience. On the other hand, I don't think that's really what Jesus was getting at. I don't think he was saying, do this ritual. I think he was saying, be willing to lower yourself to do the jobs that no one else wants to do. To become a servant to those around you, even when it's dirty and stinky. And I think that Jesus wants us to find our own ways of living that out in a figurative sort of way. Now, to shift sort of analogies here for a minute, Jesus calls us to be a servant and even take on the job of the very lowest slave in the household. But not all servants in those days were the foot-washing servants. There were actually slaves and servants that held very high positions in that day. In a large household that was filled with children and extended family and lots of servants and slaves, it was often a particular servant that was in charge of the whole thing. They were often treated quite well, but they were still a slave, a servant. This kind of slave was called an oikonomos, which we know today as a steward. So the oikonomos would be entrusted with all of his master's wealth to manage according to his master's desires. And so the oikonomos in some ways might appear to be extremely wealthy and extremely rich because of all the wealth that was under his control, and yet he wasn't free to just use it however he wanted. That he was instructed to use it according to the master's purposes, according to the master's wishes. And so this idea of a steward, I think, is really key for us as we begin to wrap our minds around, well, what does it mean to see myself as a servant? We are all servants, and we should be willing to do the lowest jobs, but we're also servants who have been entrusted with the master's wealth in all kinds of different ways. In the physical stuff we own, in the money in our bank account, in the gifts and talents we're given, in the opportunities that come to us. We're given all kinds of stuff, and we're entrusted with it. And we need to begin to look at ourselves as servants who are managing what belongs to someone else, rather than as the end goal, and we get to use it exactly how we want. And so with that in mind, I want to read 1 Peter 4:10. I think this is such a key verse here, and maybe one to commit to memory. I think this sums up what we want people to do in this area of discipleship. 1 Peter 4:10, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards, or oikonomos, of God's grace in its various forms. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. So first of all, this is a verse for all of us. He starts out, each of you. So there's no special calling thing here, no super Christian designation that you need. It's to everyone who's a follower of Christ. And Peter says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received. Now, what kind of gift does he mean? What is he talking about? The Bible talks a lot about spiritual gifts, which are these special talents that the Holy Spirit gives to followers of Jesus that allow them to serve beyond their natural abilities. Now, these things can range from like miraculous gifts like healing to just sort of seemingly mundane things like showing mercy or administration or giving or encouragement. But they're things that when you do them, there's like supernatural results, even if they seem kind of ordinary. It's just like God works through you when you do these things. And I think these are incredibly important. I think it's important to understand what gifts you have, unless you happen to be of the type of person that the Holy Spirit didn't give any gifts. No, I'm just kidding. The Bible does not talk about a type of person where the Holy Spirit did not give special gifts. Everyone in the church has a gift or has gifts to be used in this kingdom environment. But I don't think he's just talking about spiritual gifts here. I don't think it's that narrow, because if you skip to the end, it says that we're supposed to be faithful stewards of God's grace in all its various forms. How does God's grace, his kindness, his goodness show up in our lives? In all kinds of different ways. In all kinds of different things that we receive as gifts by no merit of our own. Yeah, maybe we do a little work, but we do it with the health and strength that God gives us. Yeah, maybe we go to school, but we do it with the intellect that God gives us and the money that God gives us. Everything in our lives is a gift from God. It's his grace. And when we learn to recognize that, we can begin to see ourselves as stewards. We are servants who are entrusted with the wealth of the master, and he has given us so much. Peter here says when you look at all the different things, when you count your blessings in life, the point is not just to be thankful for them, which of course is important. It's also to think about, how can I be a faithful steward of all the different expressions of God's grace in my life? How can I use these things to serve others? Your education that you received as a gift, use it to serve others. The house or apartment or whatever it is that you get to live in, use it to serve others. The physical strength and health that you enjoy, however much you have, use it to serve others. The money in your bank account, the stuff you own that you get to use, well, use that to serve others. The natural talents and the spiritual gifts and the abilities and the learned skills and all those things that you've accumulated and the opportunities you've been given in life, ask God how you can use them to serve others. If you have any doubts about how you might do this, I'm going to go ahead and make a list of things that I might need to borrow from you and jobs I need done around my house, just so that you have a way to put this into practice. Now, when I hear the word stewardship thrown out in church, I often hear it used in conjunction with money. And I think this is important. Financial stewardship means looking at everything you've been given as if it were entrusted to you by God and managing your finances in such a way that it honors him. To do stuff like tithing, to giving, staying wise with your finances, avoiding huge debt, trying not to be materialistic, all these things have to do with financial stewardship. But I'm afraid that sometimes we don't understand that stewardship is not just about, say, giving 10% of my money away and then I'm free to use the 90% that I keep however I want. Stewardship is really about seeing everything in life, your money, your time, your talents, your gifts, your abilities, everything that God has given you, seeing that as a gift from him and asking him how you can use it for him. So it's not just about paying the tithe bill, getting that out of the way, and then living your own life. Stewardship is about your whole life. And this shift of looking at ourselves as servants and as stewards is absolutely essential. Now, there's this interesting thing that happens. When people come into a church like ours, they often come in looking to be served. All right? And that's natural. That's fine. They come in with spiritual, emotional needs that they want to have met. They come in looking for answers, for inspiration, for hope, for a connection with God. So they come in with this sense of please give me something. Very few people come to a church for the first time saying, I'm here, I'm God's gift to you. They're looking to receive. And we understand that and we appreciate that. And there's a natural, normal period of time where you're seeking and growing. But understand this, we as a church want to reverse that eventually in every person who comes through our doors. And we want to, even if they come in as consumers, to get what we're offering, we want to turn them into contributors who are servants of the world around them. We want to help people make that switch. And that's what this aspect of our mission is all about. It's helping people see themselves as stewards and servants. Now, you can do that by getting involved in serving here, because when you serve at the church, I believe you're serving the world, because we as a church are here for the good of our community. And so when you make coffee on Sunday morning, you're serving not me. I could bring my own coffee. You're serving those spiritual seekers that might come in and might need that cup of coffee to hide behind in order to feel comfortable. You're serving the people who might come in and just, need to connect with someone, and the standing around and drinking coffee helps that happen. And so it's not about like serving our mechanism. It's about serving, when you're serving at the church, it's about serving our mission, and our mission is a mission that looks outward. But you can also serve by getting involved in other organizations. Many of us serve at the table or the door or Young Life or Christine's Place or many other great organizations in our area. You can also serve by simply seeing yourself as a servant in your everyday life, in your workplace, at your home, in your school, in your neighborhood. That when we dismiss you on Sundays, you go out as this army of servants to make a difference across Muskoka. And I think we as a church also come together in ways that we together can serve directly the people around us. Not just by inviting them into a service where they can learn about God, but by going and meeting their needs. And so this idea of service takes place in a lot of different ways. By the way, we have a team that plans opportunities to go out and serve our community and even beyond that. And Barb McQuillan leads that team, and she's looking for more team members. If this is something that strikes your heart and you go, this is the part of our mission that really gets me excited, join her team. Help us all find ways to serve our community. Talk to Barb. We need to understand as well that serving the world is not always about good deeds. Sometimes it's about sharing a good message. It's about sharing the good news of hope in Jesus, helping other people find the relationship with God that we're experiencing. Because if all we ever do in serving the world is meet tangible needs, feed the hungry, and we never feed their spiritual hunger, we never give them this message of incredible hope that we have that spurs us on to meet their hunger, then we've kind of missed the point of why Jesus came. Because he didn't just come to heal people who then later would die. He came to heal people as evidence of God's goodness and his desire to have a relationship with them. And so when we do good deeds, it's important that we also understand that sometimes, not always, good words and a good message and the good news of Jesus needs to accompany that. That doesn't mean that before we give someone a meal, we need to have them say a prayer. Okay, sometimes churches have gone a little too far that way, but I sense that the pendulum is swinging the other way, where all we do is good deeds and we're a little bit scared of sharing our faith. Sometimes the best way that we can serve the people around us is by telling them the incredible message of Jesus and sharing the love of God with them and opening our lives to them. I think that at some point in our lives, a lot of us wished that we could change the world. There was something in our hearts that wanted to change the world, to do good, to accomplish great things. And sometimes those things fade with time. We opened with that song that expressed this frustration of, there's nothing I can do to change the world, so I'm just going to stand back and wait for it to change. I'm going to take a completely passive approach to changing the world. That's what John Mayer expressed. On the other end of the spectrum, I think sometimes we feel the weight of the world on our shoulders, like we need to do it all ourselves. All we see are all the problems in the world, and we don't see how one person can make a difference. This idea of stewardship finds a healthy balance right in the middle that says, God has given me particular gifts. He's given me a particular calling. He's given me talents, abilities, opportunities, and he expects me to use those faithfully. And if I can do that, then I will fit in and do my little part to change the world according to his plan. I don't have to worry about the things I haven't been given. I don't have to worry about the opportunities I haven't been given. I just have to do what God has called me to do, what God has placed in my hands. And if I worry about that, then I'll let him worry about all the other problems in the world. So this idea of stewardship finds this healthy balance where we don't feel like we have to do everything to change the world, but we also don't take this passive, well, I can't change the world. You can change the world simply by being who God has called you to be. There's a famous quote by Howard Thurman, and I don't know who he is, but I'd like this quote. The quote says, "Do not ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. And then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." Now, maybe we would say what the world needs is people who are faithfully stewarding the gifts that God gave them. Because that's when you come alive. Is when you're just living into who God made you to be and not worrying about all the things you don't have. So the question asked is not whether you're making a big enough mark or you're significant enough or important enough or great enough. It's whether you're serving others as faithful stewards of God's grace in all its various forms. Now, another thing that we need to talk about when we talk about serving is self-care. It is possible to get so caught up in this idea of serving God and serving others that you burn yourself out badly. Now, obviously, if you are really spiritual, if you're a good Christian, you have unlimited emotional, physical, and spiritual energy. Okay? You never get drained as long as you're serving God, and if you do get drained, all you have to do is just pray, and He'll fill you right up again. That's clearly not true. Okay? That's clearly not true. And yet, so many times I see people in churches act as if it were true. Even servants need rest. Even servants get days off. Even servants can have fun, have families, have friendships, do things that are life-giving. Even servants can have hobbies. Because servants are humans too, and they have human needs. One of my favorite books of all time is Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer. And he says this. He says about self-care, he says, "Self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift I have, the gift I was put on earth to offer others." Anytime we can listen to true self and give it the care it requires, we do it not only for ourselves, but for the many others whose lives we touch. And I think he's absolutely right. That good stewardship is not just always meeting the needs of everyone else. It's actually meeting the needs of myself so that I can continue meeting the needs of others. Now, will God sometimes give us supernatural strength and fill us when we're empty? Yes. But I think sometimes He expects us to love ourselves so that we can love others. Because He did tell us to love others as we love ourselves. Sometimes I think that we go about this idea of servanthood like a kid in an arcade, given a bunch of tokens. Spend them as fast as you can, and then feel sad when you run out. I think He wants us to treat what we've been given more like a trust fund, that we want to last our whole life. We want to continue to be able to be generous and to serve out of what we've been given for as long as possible. Now, another way of looking at this is we have limits. We can't do everything, and it's important to accept the gift of the limits that God has given us. He has not called us to serve in every possible way. He's called us to serve in particular ways. Another Parker Palmer quote is this: "There is as much guidance in what does not and cannot happen in my life as there is in what can and does, and maybe more." The fact that God did not give you certain gifts, certain opportunities, certain capacities, means He does not expect you to operate as if you did have them. And so focus on what you have been given, not on what you lack. I think some people struggle with this idea of servanthood because they're too proud and they don't want to sort of stoop down and serve. But I think more people struggle with the idea of stewardship, not because they're too proud, but because they don't believe they have anything to offer. That somehow their contribution isn't that valuable, and so it doesn't really matter whether they serve or not. It kind of reminds me of when I was in grade 8 and I played on the school basketball team. Oh, I didn't know you were a basketball player. I am not, and I never was. But at the tiny little Christian school that I attended in grade 7 and 8, there was a need for everyone to be on the team. I was bad at shooting, and I was bad at offense, and I was bad at defense, and I was bad at passing, and I was also bad at catching passes. And looking back, I could probably have gotten a little better if I had some more self-confidence. and if I had ever practiced. Maybe those two things would have helped. But as it was, I was terrible. And I knew it. I didn't believe I had anything important to contribute to the game, and so I preferred to sit on the bench and watch the good people play. Okay? Now, the few occasions when I actually did get put out, which was when we were either winning a lot or losing a lot, I screwed up every time. And so my intuition about not having anything valuable to offer was correct. Now, that is not the same in the church and in life. Everyone does have something valuable to contribute. And if you're not out there playing, if you're happy just to sit on the bench because it's too much of a risk to get out on the floor and everybody might see you screw up and you're not as good as everyone else, and so I'll just sit here and wait on the world to change. If you're doing that, then we're all missing out on what you have to offer, because you have gifts and you have talents and you have abilities, and there's parts of you and your personality that are important. It doesn't matter who you are. God doesn't create junk and he doesn't make mistakes. You have a purpose. And as long as you're happy to sit on that bench, we miss out. It's important for everyone to see themselves as faithful stewards. Because see, God didn't go, oh, I'm going to entrust Jeremy with all the gifts that this church needs. And as long as he's being faithful, the church will operate okay. No. God said, I'm going to give a little bit to you and 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 you. I'll give a little bit to Jeremy. And as long as everybody's contributing, this church is going to be just fine. It's important that we understand everyone has a role. It wasn't like me on the basketball team, even if you feel like it might be. There's something very freeing about just going, okay, this is my calling. This is my position that I get to play. Other people are playing their roles, and it's all working out. Now we're going to end the service with communion. We're going to do a couple more songs in keeping with this theme. And if you're worried about it ending late, it's because you showed up late. So sorry. And I'm even more deeply sorry to those who showed up on time. But we want this time to be a time for you to reflect on this, because there's a lot of head stuff that I've just shared with you. But to tell you the truth, the change that needs to happen is a change in our hearts, not on our heads. That we need to not just think of ourselves as stewards, but we need to experience this idea that everything's a gift. And we need to experience joy at this idea of stooping down and washing each other's feet. And that kind of thing can only come from God. So I'm going to invite you, as we do the music, to come down the middle aisles, take a cup, take a piece of bread, take it back to your seat. Allow it to be a time of reflection on the one who didn't come to be served. Even though he was clearly the most important person in the room, he didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many, including us. We don't have rules about who can take it, who can't. All that we ask is that you recognize in this time Jesus' body broken for you and his blood poured out for you. I want you to think about whether you're willing to make that shift. Are you willing to become a servant in your own family? Not a tyrant, but a servant. Are you willing to become a servant in your workplace, to your friends and your neighbors, your extended family? Are you willing to see yourself as a servant in our church? Not asking always, what am I getting out of this? But how am I contributing? How am I giving? How am I faithfully stewarding my gifts? So I'm going to invite the band to come up now, and I'm just going to lead us in a time of prayer to reflect on this. God, you have given us so much. And it's an expression of your grace, of your kindness, of your goodness to us. We haven't done anything to earn it or deserve it. Sure, we've worked, we've cooperated, we've stewarded what you've given us. But we want to recognize everything is a gift. Help us steward it well. Help us manage it well. Help us to care for ourselves when we need to. Help us to find ways to fill our tanks so that we can serve others better. And God, may we truly embrace this idea that greatness is not measured by our success or achievement or our recognition or importance in the eyes of the world, but greatness is measured by our ability to live into this idea of servanthood. May we become an army of servants, looking to outdo each other in how well we can serve each other in the world around us. And may our church make a difference in our community and in our world. In Jesus' name.